This is an Irish Independent podcast.
779 days is how long Irish fans had to wait for a competitive win on home soil against a team other than Gibraltar. Last night's 1-0 victory over Finland guarantees Ireland a Nations League playoff in the new year to stay in League B, but for now we are left with plenty to discuss following the second win of Caoimhin Kelleher's tenure. Welcome to the Indo Sport podcast. Will Slattery here with you, filling in for Joe Malloy, who is on duty for Ireland versus Argentina tonight on Virgin Media. And if you want to enjoy some build-up to the rugby, you can find plenty in the Indo Sport feed and also over on the Left Wing podcast. But for now, I'm delighted to be joined for our post-match debrief today by Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent and former Ireland international Gary Breen. There's also been some breaking news in the League of Ireland this morning with the announcement that Ruaidhri Higgins has left Derry City after their disastrous end to the season, which we will discuss later in the show. But first though, Dan, we will focus on Ireland versus Finland. Ireland 1-0 winners, the Evan Ferguson header just before half-time proving enough. Caoimhin Kelleher obviously being called upon to save that late penalty to preserve the 3 points. And I want to start with the opening line of your analysis piece, actually. You said, another win over Finland for a team that remain a distance from the finished article. What about last night's performance kind of drew you to that conclusion?
Yeah, look, I mean, to be fair, I think Caoimhin Kelleher said it himself afterwards. I thought his demeanour last night, I think his demeanour is very sort of honest after games. And I actually got the vibe off him last night that he was a little bit underwhelmed, you know, that there was no sense to come in and sugarcoat what Ireland had produced. And it was a strange one. Yeah, I thought it was very loose. It didn't quite have the feel. I don't know. I saw some people comment, it was great atmosphere and stuff. I don't know. To me, it felt like just a step up from a friendly, like there was a sort of a freedom in the game, which is unusual. Like normally you'd have this really intense sort of proper international atmosphere in a meaningful game. And while Finland, had the motivation to go and win, to get off bottom, they left a couple of their 21s at home. They had a bit of a go, like Finland, to be fair to them, they had nothing to lose. But it just wasn't very complete. And I think even Hamer, after the game against Greece in September, at home, he was like, okay, I'm seeing signs of what we're trying to work on. I think after Helsinki, he was in pretty good form because there was a sense of, okay, yeah, Ireland rode the luck a little bit in that game, but there was a little bit more of, okay, this is what we're trying to work on. I sort of feel like last night was a little bit of a mad game at times. It was just wide open. Like it was just 6, 7, 8 times it felt like Finland just threaded passes through and didn't have to work very hard to create opportunities. So I don't think anyone, I've covered a lot of Ireland draws and defeats, so I'm always conscious of this is typical now. You're talking about a win and you're being picky. But I don't think anyone could walk away from the stadium last night realistically and say, okay, we've turned a corner now. You know, this team has turned a corner. I'm interested, to hear other people's opinions on it, but certainly my instinctive impression was, it was like, okay, great to win. Brilliant to win, and I guess in terms of this qualifying group finishing third, I think you can't say Ireland have done better than they should or worse than they should. I think it's a fair enough reflection of where they're at, but you're just thinking, okay, do you think that this team is going to go and do things next year? As Hamer said himself, if you're going to qualify for a World Cup, you need to be a lot better than this.
Yeah, bring Gary Breen in now. Gary, in some ways, it's kind of the inverse to some of the Stephen Kenny performances, in that, in his era, there was some good performances and the results never quite seemed to come. Last night, getting a win on home soil, as I mentioned, the first time against a team other than Gibraltar in a competitive game for almost 2.5 years. But a lot of people, and I saw you making the point on Virgin, are kind of picking out various instances of the performance that weren't probably up to what people had hoped.
No, and you don't do that with any joy as such. And the word I'll probably focus on there is what Dan said. It felt loose. And we're talking about going to this back to basics approach, which is an effective way of playing that enables these players to compete against so-called better opposition. But within that, you have to nail down exactly what are the remits of that type of system. And it's a 4-4-2 system that is having a renaissance even at Premier League level now, because it has its very good attributes. But against other systems, there are of course vulnerabilities to it. And notably, and certainly something that we've experienced with Ireland, it's having those two in central midfield and giving that extra man away. And I just felt at times that even the way we were playing it, I couldn't really see any patterns of play in terms of what they would have been doing on the coaching ground that transmitted to the pitch. And that's so frustrating because it is a relatively basic system to play. And even the fact that Matt Doherty comes back into the team and played right back in a more of a kind of hybrid role that at times he would narrow up to make a third centre back. And O'Dowda, the plus of that is that he can get more advanced on the left-hand side at full back. But I'm thinking, well, if you're playing 4-4-2, why are you doing that? It's just complicating the matter for no real benefit. And Heimer talked about, good switches of play, the opportunity that they didn't take advantage of the extra man they had out wide. And of course, we saw that with Mikey Johnson's brilliant wing play and that lovely floated cross for Evan to score. And they were in isolation as such. And I just feel that if they're going to play this system, then it has to be nailed down far more than it has been so far. And my question then would be is, as much as he talks about his philosophy, I think 5 games in, you can say it's 4 games for Heimer because of the fact that he deferred the England game to John O'Shea initially. But I still think that's enough to get those basic requirements forward because it's not that difficult to coach that system. It really isn't. And I genuinely believe that these players are intelligent enough. They're playing for a host of different types of managers, so they're used to different types of systems. So they can definitely do it. But I saw on the pitch last night lots of confusion in terms of when to press, when to break out a structure, what were the passing patterns, where were the links, where were the partnerships. I saw very little of that, and it was a bit concerning, I have to say.
Interesting. Gary's picked out a few things there. Like, are Ireland really suffering from that period where, ultimately John O'Shea took those friendlies? Like, if Heimer had been able to come in earlier, bed in some of these issues in those friendly games with a lot less pressure on, they could have really hit the ground running in the Nations League, and maybe the performances will be better, Dan, or what's your sense of maybe that?
Yeah, no, look, I think that's a fair point. I think we all probably acknowledged that when the manager came in, that there's no way, right? There's no way you would sit down after Ireland failed to get to the Euros and say, here's what we're going to do to qualify for the next tournament. We're going to have, 2 windows of friendlies and give someone else a crack at it. An interim manager and so on. So, and in some ways I feel like we're going over old ground there, but in saying that, it's still entirely relevant.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's a strange one because across the year, I feel like I know that Gary's obviously said this before, that it does not, like, Stephen Kenny played in a particular way, and it's not as if then you just have to completely flip and go the other way. But I think maybe we had an anticipation with Heimer that it was going to be about being hard to beat, and some of this language has been about, it's going to be horrible to play against. That was maybe coming from players or from staff. And I still feel Ireland don't look like a horrible team to play against at all. Particularly at home, which is a concern. I think if you look at the games, in Dublin and teams, opposition analysis that other teams are doing, they're thinking, yeah, this team will give you a chance. I know Gary spoke at the Greece game, and there was a bit of it last night as well, where they're happy to give up the sides a little bit and say, okay, trust on their ability to recover. But yeah, it's just a lack of a real clear identity, really, of the team at this stage. And there are some mitigating factors, right, to be fair. Yeah. Some players missing. Now, that happens in international football. Heimer's big message this week was, in an ideal world, and this stands to your point about the time he's had, every player coming in will know their role. That it's almost like everyone will have a clearly defined role. And if you're missing Ogbene or you're missing Robbie Brady, it's a simple sort of replacement. But I don't know. Yeah. What I'm interested in, Gary, is that, right, okay, let's just say that's going to be 4-4-2 going forward, right? I do think, I kind of wonder, would Mikey Johnston and Festy in an ideal world have been the pairings? Because they're you see Mikey Johnston got caught a couple of times, even in his own sort of half. What do you need from the wide players in that system, or from the midfield 4 in that system, if you're going to play a front 2? Because to me, it seems like that's obviously a massive issue here.
No, it's a huge issue. You're so right to identify, and you're always reluctant to go back to the team or the squad that I play in because of the level of player. But the ones that immediately spring to mind, those wide position, the likes of McAteer on the right hand side, Kevin Kilban, who are equally comfortable going forward as they are being back as well. But more often than not, they have the ability to narrow up and to make that space when you have those 2 in central midfield not as apparent. The fact that our defence would squeeze the pitch as well to keep it condensed. And of course, you've got centre forwards who can drop into 10, whatever. But it'd be interesting because you look at Abaseli, you think exciting, and you think Michael Johnson as a winger as well. And you wonder whether or not, certainly looking at the England game, would they be thinking or kind of like veering away from those out-and-out wingers to maybe even put O'Dowda in that advanced left position and maybe Knight in the right. So they do have the energy to get forward. They do have to have that ability, because Knight's performed well for us at times under Stephen Kelleher on that right side of midfield. So they can do that little bit in that final third, but they will naturally get back. They will naturally narrow up, and you could probably put more defensive-minded players in those full-back areas. But it's difficult. But ultimately, we can reference the fact that Brady and Ogbeni are not there, but I still wouldn't expect the philosophy to change in terms of what they're looking to do. I don't think it's a case of players being missing and they're the type who, like Damien Duff, can get the ball off the goalkeeper, take everyone on and score. I still think there should be a method behind how they're playing. And I just genuinely, I'm really struggling to see it, bearing in mind that Heimer was billed as this guy who would be so organised, that he would bring a bit of structure to our play. But as you quite rightly mentioned, Dan, Finland felt so comfortable against us in terms of being on the ball. And they weren't particularly good on the ball, yet they were able to get control of that midfield area and pass through us at times. And sometimes, you know, 3 or 4 games into this regime, and initially you're thinking, yeah, I can see what he's doing. After last night, my initial excitement in terms of what I saw in terms of a front two, Smodix playing centrally with Ferguson, I thought he threatened him behind well. But on review, when you kind of sit back and digest it all without the emotion of actually watching it live, I was feel a little bit deflated in terms of just how far off they are in terms of the patterns they need to be nailed down.
I do want to ask you guys about positives as well, because they did win the game. But one last point off what Gary was saying about, you know, what he's been watching. You know, Heimer's given 22 players starts across the first 5 games. There's obviously been guys unavailable across that. Like, do you think he knows his best team yet? Like, do you think if everyone was fit, he would actually be able to identify, this is my strongest team, this is the best team, this is the most effective team I can put out, and the formation I want to put it in?
I don't know. Like, I last month there was a sort of a sense maybe that you're with the available options, you were thinking, yeah, you have an idea of what his best team might be, but I don't know. Then I know Gary spoke about this, like, you know, you think, okay, there's a Collins and Scales partnership developing, but then he's brought Shane Duffy back in. And now I know he wasn't able to take up the role because of injury, but he's speaking about, okay, maybe he's not sure about the leadership in that area. And like the Smodix positioning is one as well, because I sort of wondered, like, if he wants to play in a front two, then obviously Smodix is probably going to be in the middle, but then that leaves a vacancy on the left. I thought maybe he was going round to maybe, you know, Smodix on one side, Ogbeni on the other, and Ferguson between them. But obviously he's now talking about a front two. So to answer your question, I don't think so. And obviously, like, Ogbeni's gone for 9 months now, it seems. So that's a big question. You know, he's gone for Cullen and Knight in midfield for a couple of, you know, consecutive games. But obviously Will Smallbone looked like he was going to be a starter, and he hasn't been around. So the picture just seems a little bit confused, all right. And then maybe that's not a bad thing. But I don't know what you think, Gary, because like it did seem like there was a Collins-Scales partnership forming, and then the comments around the squad announcement would make you think maybe he's not sure.
Yeah, and my initial reaction to what he said, it centred around the fact that he said in the first half against Greece, he didn't feel the 2 centre-halves won enough duels. And then he caveated that by saying he's bringing Duffy into the squad. Now, that's all in good, bringing Duffy back. I have no issue with that at all. But so I thought, oh, do you know what? I'll watch that back, that first half. And I just didn't see it. There were 2 or 3 occasions, I could argue, but I was clutching at trying to find those examples of them not winning the first contact. So ultimately, what you saw in that first half against Greece was just they were totally dominant in midfield and at 10. So they were able to move our team around, and the kind of centre-halves were being moved far more than they would hope to. They lacked a little bit of composure, but that made absolutely no sense. And you're looking for consistency in terms of selection. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, there'll be injuries, and this is an opportunity for him to see everyone. I don't like the fact that he's using the Nations League. I think we should be going after those type of competitions, but he's got an opportunity to do that. He's made 5 substitutions in all of the game, apart from Finland away, where he made 4. So many players are getting opportunities. And yet on that centre-back issue, Duffy's not in the original squad. He's got McGuinness and he's got O'Brien. And as much as we've seen so many players, we've seen nothing of them. And you think, okay, well, if you're going to see everyone, let's see them. So it just doesn't kind of add up. And that's the frustration where you're kind of thinking, well, hold on, this don't quite make sense. And on last night, I thought he was excellent. I thought Scales was excellent as well in terms of they were doing little things where Finland were breaking, getting in wide. They were taking up good early positions on that near post, and they had a bit of authority about them. I think Collins, in terms of getting the armband, has really responded well to the mistakes he made. The fact he's played every minute for Brentford suggests how highly thought of he is there. The flip side of that is that Scales has come out of the Celtic team through no fault of his own, but for Brendan Rodgers favouring other centre-backs, which I thought the response of both those centre-halves on the back of what that manager, on the back of what Heimer has said about the Greece first half, I thought their response was brilliant. And they literally said to their manager, oh yeah, well, we'll show you.
Yeah, Nathan Collins made a crucial block in the first half to deny what looked to be a certain Finland goal. Dan, what were the other positives for you? Gary mentioned obviously the centre-backs being quite solid at the back. Anything else like that you saw that you thought, okay, that could work, that's promising?
Yeah, I think the strike partnership is definitely one, the Ferguson Smodics dynamic. Although, again, I think that question we've spoken about, like what four do you play behind them or with them, is a question. I really like Mikey Johnston as well. I like the good side of what he can bring, and I think I like the goal. As I said, it was almost a sort of a beautiful sort of simplicity about it. It's just and even Johnston speaking about it afterwards, it was like he knows if he can just get the ball into the area, into the right position. And I have to say, even just Ferguson in general, I took a lot from his performance. I know it wasn't perfect. I mean, he gave away a penalty. He's still, you can tell he's still feeling his way back. But yeah, there's something I like about a 1-0 and the Ferguson goal. If Ireland are going to qualify for anything in the next decade,
that's the template.
You're going to need a lot of those, Yeah. And I think with Evan, I've such sympathy for him in some respects, because there is only one of him, and he's 20, and yet if he doesn't play for a couple of weeks, it's a story. And of course, look, we should be analysing and looking at these things, but I actually like the fact maybe at the moment it sounds like it's a bit stupid thing to say, but okay, he hasn't been playing every week for Brighton, but I feel like he's coming into these windows going, okay, he's coming into a place where he knows he's got the responsibility. He's at times last year he had those injury issues. You felt like maybe Brighton were minding him around their international windows, and there was a sense of he might be under a bit of pressure from his club. Now he's actually used these windows to push himself forward. I think you can see an image there of, okay, Evan is the future. I don't think Evan Ferguson is going to drift away maybe an Aaron Connolly or an Obafemi or some of these players. I think Evan's here for the next decade, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. And I liked what I saw from him last night. Yeah, it's not perfect, but he still has this presence. The through ball for Smodics, I know he was offside, but then you have the range between that and then he's getting on the end of a cross and scoring a header. It's we are totally entitled to be excited about this fella. It's absolutely fine. We don't have to apologise for it. He's going to be a big player in the next 10 years without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah,
the leap for the goal was particularly impressive. The Finland defender, the left back, I think, was put. It's like someone slam dunking in basketball, and he's just ducking under it. It was an impressive leap. Gary, on Evan Ferguson, Dan's points there. How important is it for him to kind of get clarity on his club future to really prosper with Ireland? Does he need to go to another club where he'll be playing regularly? Or to Dan's point, do you think he's actually kind of in a roundabout way benefited from maybe being hungrier or being fresher or having a point to prove when he has come into Ireland camp, given his current situation at Brighton?
No, you're always mindful of speculating and trying to change clubs for him, but ultimately you just want him to be healthy. And I know the fact he probably ain't getting as much game time, but he's training all the time, and that's what he'll enable his injuries to heal properly. And then you're seeing the glimpses, as Dan quite rightly said. I mean, that jump was brilliant. He gets up so early as a recovering centre-back trying to get back on that cross. You've got no chance. He gets up, he hangs there. It's a brilliant bit of centre-forward play. And for me, I just think he's in a great place at Brighton. I think he'll get his fair game time there. But it's difficult because when you get in on those kind of clubs and you get the shirt, it's very difficult to remove those players. So the only way you can do it is by training regularly and staying healthy, and that's all you hope. And then obviously we'll get the benefit for Ireland.
Another positive, Dan, was Caoimhin Kelleher's performance. He picked up man of the match. The penalty save was, a huge moment. It looked like the air was going to come out of the stadium. Instead, it was, you saw the reaction on the bench of the management team. his very interesting as well, his future. He's kind of like Evan Ferguson, like there's a bit of uncertainty around him. Like your piece today, you mentioned not only Evan Ferguson, but Caoimhin Kelleher will have to play a massive role in any success Heimer Hallgrimsson has. Like, how vital is it that he gets some, I suppose, again, clarity on whether he'll be playing with Liverpool, whether he'll be playing elsewhere, and how quickly that's resolved?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, Arnie Slot has said last week Alisson is the number one, and that's
emphatically
it.
As well.
Very emphatically. And I just think as well, like the game is just about players sometimes, and you just sort of see Kelleher and you think, well, it makes sense that he was comfortable last night because he's playing at the highest standard club football pretty much in the world at the moment,
well,
and well. And he's just so calm, Like, I know he made the mistake in Athens or whatever, but like he has this sort of composure about him. And yeah, I understand. Like he said himself, he tends to use international duty now and again to come and do a press conference to say, "I want to go, I want to leave." It's like his safe space to come and talk about it. But Alisson seems to be so injury prone at the moment that it feels like he's going to be at Liverpool for the rest of the season anyway. I find it very hard to see how anything would happen in January when they have the keeper coming in, the Georgian keeper coming in the summer. So, like, yeah, I mean, I think from an Irish point of view, it does look very likely that our World Cup campaign is going to be centred around next September, October and November. Like, very likely Ireland are going to be in a 4-team group. There's going to be a little bit of a sprint. So in terms of like the situation of someone like Kelleher, and like Gavin Bazunu will be back, and I'm still a big believer in Gavin Bazunu's abilities, but if Kelleher wants to be number one, I think next summer is going to be the key point for his future. But I just think it's a good problem to have, because I can assume, Gary, even as a defender, if you've got someone behind you who's exuding a bit of confidence, life's a lot easier.
He just has such authority about his game. He's so cool, calm. I really enjoy watching him. And I just think with every game he's playing for Liverpool, that kind of confidence and that momentum, it just builds. And he's showing what a brilliant goalkeeper is. I think he's one of the best in the Premier League, without a doubt. And you wonder whether or not the injuries that Alisson is starting to have may well change the decision of Liverpool, because I know so much has been said, and Shay Given would have been quite vocal on this. He feels he should leave Liverpool, but I'm still mindful that, he's very close to being the outright number one at Liverpool. If he was to jump ship too early, you may never get that opportunity to be the number one at such an iconic club. And when the penalty was given, I called it. I felt in terms of how well he's been playing. I've seen so many games for him at Liverpool. I just felt he was going to save it. He's been so good for Liverpool this season in terms of how quick he comes off his line. I have this argument with my dad all the time about goalkeepers. He keeps going on about Charlie Nelligan in the Great Kerry team about staying on your line, and I'm like, don't quite work like that. But he's got real presence, and I think it's getting better all the time. He looks bigger, he looks stronger. I think he's a brilliant goalkeeper. We're so lucky to have him, Bazunu, and of course Travers is playing very well as well for Bournemouth in recent games in the Premier League. We're blessed in that position.
Just on Slot's comments, Dan, you've referred to them there. They were so emphatic. I'd say it was very deflating for Kelleher. Obviously, Alisson is a world famous goalkeeper, has won many trophies with Liverpool, and he is the number one. But just the way Slot said it, that brook no argument, that no matter what happens, basically he said, under no circumstances is Alisson being dislodged. It would surely make Kelleher feel, and I agree with Gary that he's playing so well and he's a lot younger than Alisson, and those soft tissue injuries are adding up, but those comments were just a real gut punch, I'd say. Yeah,
like, there was no room for misinterpreting, but maybe Slot's looking at Kelleher was very emphatic in his comments last month about wanting to leave as well, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes there and what sort of discussions are being had, but it does seem like he knows where he stands. But I mean, things can always change. Like if it does seem like Alisson isn't a million miles away from coming back at the moment, you kind of think, not to wish ill on him, but if he could just get another month or another sort of 6, 8,
another
10
calf
game,
injury,
and then you'll see. But I think Kelleher might have left Liverpool before now if someone had come forward with an offer that Liverpool couldn't refuse. There has been a sense that there's been a valuation there that clubs maybe have been reluctant to meet. And I would think now, surely, like he's playing himself into that standing that, maybe a better class of club will be looking at him now than maybe might have been 12, 18 months ago.
Yeah, you can see him at Chelsea, couldn't use something like that in terms of the troubles that they're having. I don't think he'll be short of suitors, no doubt.
One thing I want to ask both of you about, and Dan, you referred to it at the start, is Heimir Hallgrimsson, I suppose, in his post-match press conference and just his forthright communication style generally. You know, like he was asked by Tony O'Donoghue on RT after the game about, is winning becoming a habit, and he was kind of given a softball to kind of, have a bit of positivity. And we're going to listen to now what his answer was to that question.
No, but I think this game we were a little bit lucky. So Finland 2 times hit the post. So it wasn't all that pretty at times. It's too open for my sake, and I think this group probably deserves a little luck. They have been unlucky for a long time, but it was probably an entertaining 1-0 match. It was chances. There were a lot of set pieces and a little bit more. Too many chances for my taste. But yeah, always nice to win.
And I suppose, I know he kind of expanded on those answers in the press conference with the journalists afterwards and later answers. And I just found it was something refreshing that he came out and he didn't kind of try to spin it as some sort of like great victory, or like, I know a criticism of Stephen Kenny was that he was always focusing on the positives, even when fans watching it would maybe have had a different view, whereas Heimir held his hands up and was like, he just laughed at the answer. Instead of saying, you're right, winning is a great habit to get into and we showed steel to close that out, he was like, well, honestly, like, they hit the post twice and we were probably a little fortunate. Like, how important do you think that is to have that kind of relationship with the public who's ultimately he's talking to? Because I think it does buy him some time, whereas, Gary and yourself have outlined a lot of maybe issues with the performance, but the way he's addressed it, I think, does maybe get him some leeway with the supporters. Yeah,
maybe. I think, there's no doubt Stephen Kenny always was, I felt like he was always campaigning. He was always campaigning, and that was a product probably of how he started. Like, Heimir is probably coming at this from a very different perspective. It could be a 17-month contract for him. It's a very sort of straightforward enough remit. It's not like this is his job of a lifetime and he wants to hold on for it as long as possible. And there's that sense of, needing to sort of almost trying to prove yourself to people consistently that you should be there. He's quite comfortable in his own skin, and I think that's a good attribute to have, and clear communication is very important. Now, of course, then there comes a point, there's a cycle for every Ireland manager where eventually everyone gets sick of them at some stage because of some aspects of their personality. So in a year's time, people could be saying, well, that's grand, you're telling us that, we're lucky, but why
are we going to be good?
Why is that the case? Why was there too many chances? So I think there's a refreshing side to his character that it's quite easy to warm to, and there is a clear communication there, but to the extent of which it sort of will buy you a bit more time, results buy you time more than anything. I do feel like Helsinki was a huge game for him. If he goes on to be successful in this job, and everyone needs him and wants him to be successful in this job, I feel like that game in Helsinki was huge, because that game, Ireland could have lost that game. If it's 4 defeats in a row, I reckon there's a different atmosphere in the stadium last night. I really do believe that. So it can be very,
I think they go hand in hand, though. I do think it has a big impact, just because I suppose, and you would have been at the stadium working at the game, so you wouldn't have seen as many of the TV interviews directly afterwards as maybe I just would have had working in the office. There was very much a sense of frustration with how some of those questions were handled after the performances. So obviously the results are paramount. If they'd lost all 5 games, it wouldn't matter what he's saying in the press conference. But Gary, what's your perspective on how he presents himself and how he kind of answers those questions? Do you think it is important, or am I overstating it?
No, I totally agree with what you said there. I like his demeanour. I like the fact that he's honest. I think he sees the game, how it was played out. And sometimes it's difficult to do that straight after a game. Your head's spinning in terms of what's happened, but he's able to give an honest appraisal of what has happened. And I like that about him. And I do think it is refreshing. I do agree with you that I think supporters will enjoy hearing that. They don't want the wool pulled over their eyes. But there's no doubt in terms of his demeanour's brilliant. I like that. But now I want to see him stamp his personality, his philosophy on this team. I want him to really nail down exactly what he wants. I think he's had the opportunity now to look at the players, what their strengths and what their weaknesses are. And I think in terms of what they're doing in terms of coaching, I think that needs to be properly honed and fine-tuned so that these players have an opportunity. But I agree with Dan. Yeah, I think the press certainly do enjoy how engaging he is with them. I think he's good at that. I think he's come over here. There's been that kind of acclimatation period where he's had to learn about the Irish squad and what it actually means to the players, what it means to us as supporters watching it. Whereas if you look at someone like Craig Bellamy, instantly impacts at Wales because he knows what it's all about. I genuinely believe that Thomas Tuchel will instantly impact with England because he knows the league well, he knows what's required. And I do think it's taken a bit longer than it should have done, bearing in mind that it's over a year ago since Stephen Kenny had his last game. And yet I don't think we're any closer to having a definitive way of playing and one that can ultimately be successful and get us challenging in qualifications.
What should he do for Wembley then, Gary? I know that's a very broad question. I'm not sure he'll be doing motivational videos or that type of thing. We've had a few issues with that.
No.
But like, what can be done between Thursday and Sunday to go? I know you were covering the England game last night, and I watched the highlights afterwards, and you saw how England broke out for that second and third goal very quickly. You're thinking, with some of the space Ireland left the other day, that's slightly terrifying. I'd assume it'll be a different type of game, but what can he do to sort of shore it up?
Well, he's going to have to get some legs in that midfield, and we said about maybe O'Dowd and Knight going into those wide positions to give you that type of energy. But listen, it's a massive task against England. I don't think the gulf between England and Ireland has ever been as big as it is right now. England was so impressive, they were, and everyone's talking about the mess that they had against Greece at Wembley, and ultimately that was because they played too many of their creative players, technical players. They forgot about closing the back door, and Greece countered brilliantly against them. Last night, England got the early goal, settled everything down at a period where Greece were on top, but because the structure was all right, much better, they were able to withstand it, and then that quality of those goals where they broke away at such pace is a massive concern for us going up against them. I just want him to kind of look at the pluses, the minuses in terms of what from last night, and I know it's a completely different opponent in terms of the quality, but I still want him to nail down those messages of what he expects in terms of starting positions, recovery positions, but it will be tested. I think it's going to be a very difficult game for us.
Anything you want to see in particular in addition to what Gary mentioned? Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it's there is that argument between continuity and seeing players, and like that is obviously. I'd like to see him probably try Ferguson and Smolix again. I think.
You're leaving yourself light in midfield there.
Yeah, that's my slight fear, isn't it? Yeah.
No, of course. And you want to be consistent, and the games are going to be. You know, the playoff game might well be a bonus for us in March now, because it gives him an opportunity to have another look at the players again.
And
I think you're right. You've got to be consistent, and ultimately you say, okay, well, listen, if we're playing 4-4-2, then we have to play against the bigger teams. And Hyman's talked about, to qualify, you have to get results against the bigger teams. So it'd be frustrating if he was to throw out that system on one particular game, but you do have to adjust slightly. And you think and I love the way those two dovetail. I think they can do it better out of possession and in possession. I think they can link better if the work's done with them. But I'd be massively concerned that you've got two centre forwards, two wingers, and two lads in Cullen and Knight expected to kind of keep England at bay. It's a massive ask.
Yeah, I know, Gary. Look, you've got your column for tomorrow, and I've seen it already. Like, you were sort of quite, quite critical maybe of how Cullen and Knight approached aspects of their task last night. Like, what would have frustrated you? I think with Cullen, maybe one or two times you felt he was a bit lacking a little bit of discipline, maybe.
Yeah, but I think ultimately that comes from throughout the team in terms of where they all know is their triggers to go. You think about that chance just before half time where Finland hit the post. Cullen's in a decent position. He jumps out of it to press someone, and they just pass it into the position he's left, and they counter-attack against us. Knight, on a couple of occasions in the first half, was trying to initiate the press, and he was running around and no one was following him. You're thinking he was kind of like Robbie Savage, like tearing around the place back in the day for Premier League. I just want him to know when to go, when's the right time, and I just think that can be taught very quickly on the training ground. I generally do, and I think it absolutely needs to be nailed down. I think Smodic can do, and Ferguson can do more in terms of centre forwards out of possession, in terms of showing the opposition down one way. I felt that Finland got out too easily with their three centre halves. At times, Evan would close down and Smodic would be far too far away. They would easily be able to pop round the press. So there's little things like that they're going to have to nail down. And of course, we know England, they will to build from the back. So it might be an option where you say, listen, we're not even going to entertain that. We'll collect you in the middle third. We'll set traps there and we'll try and break from there.
Is there a world where they go and play 5-3-2 on Sunday? So you have your front two, but you have you have three centre halves. I'd be surprised, but could you see it?
And listen, I wouldn't dismiss the tactic, but then I'm looking and asking the question, well, you're talking about consistency. Heimer keeps talking about developing partnerships, developing an understanding. If he's suddenly going to just change all that for this game, and listen, I know the magnitude of the game, and if you feel that 4-4-2 is going to be exposed by this England team, then you have to maybe make adjustments. It wouldn't necessarily feel that you're abandoning your principles, but I don't know. I think the messages have to be clear so that the players can understand them, learn from them, and build from there.
Well, off the back of last night, I did look at the odds, and they're 11-1 to win in Wembley, which I suppose illustrates the size of the task they are facing. But for now, Gary, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure. Good luck.
Always great to get a good tactical insight from Gary Breen. Dan, you were obviously at the Aviva Stadium last night, and the atmosphere at the Aviva Stadium is a hot topic, obviously, off the back of the All Blacks rugby match last week. And generally, whenever there's an Aviva game, it seems to be one of the first things people go to. You know, what was it like last night? How did it compare with the rugby last Friday?
Oh, God, yeah. This you have to talk atmosphere now. Well, the thing is, like, there's no doubt the best atmosphere in the last week in the Aviva was the cup final, like, by a mile. But that's that's not really surprising because, like, that's... You know, you have that club atmosphere, like, you know, a 50-50 split almost, and you've got singing and flares at one end and singing and flares on the other end. So, like, you just don't get that at international games, really. You know, like, I think you were at the Europa League final and like that, like, you know, it's very hard to compete.
Felt like a different world.
Yeah, and like there's the regularity of people who go and watch your team every week and they know the songs and the chants and everything, and it's a different animal. So, yeah, like, I mean, atmosphere last night, it's fine. Like, you know, this stuff can end up into sort of like sport wars, and it's just like, yeah, nobody wins with it. Like the atmosphere at the football internationals is okay. Like, I think there's no doubt that, like, the first 20 minutes of the England game, or even the 20 minutes before the England game, there was something special about that. And there's no doubt that, like, that vibe. I remember the France game last year, the football game against France last year, like that feel, that vibe, an hour before, half an hour, 20 minutes before a really big football international is great. You know, it can be brilliant. But yeah, look, I feel like there's also been a lot of games as well. And as I said, last night had a little bit more of that friendly feel for me, where it's like, this isn't the world, you know, the outcome of this game isn't like the be all and end all. You know, people here aren't going to go home and be depressed if, like, their team doesn't win. I think sometimes that can shape the atmosphere. Maybe that extends to the rugby thing as well, that maybe, like, if you have people there who are there for the event and they're not necessarily going to be heartbroken if the result is going against them, that creates the atmosphere. Whereas you have something like a cup final, I mean, it's either utter, like, joy or utter despair, and that creates an atmosphere that it just can't really be replicated at some international games, I feel, anyway.
Well, we've reached the stage now that for tonight's Argentina-Ireland game, we have Conor McKeown attending as the atmosphere correspondent. He is there, and his sole purpose is to comment and write about the atmosphere. Such is the interest level that people now find in it.
Yeah, well, people now just want to comment on the atmosphere. Listen, I understand it. Like, I understand it, you know, but it's just, there's a lot of people watching. Like,
people who've never gone to the Aviva Stadium for a match are, like, happily weighing in and being like, how terrible the atmosphere is.
I know. Yeah, to be honest, right, it's also not the most atmospheric stadium as well. I mean, I will, like sometimes, you know, you have these arenas which are, like, I was at the Euros in the summer, and the Dortmund stadium is fantastic. Like, it's just brilliant. It's like the design of it, the crowd is like, there's a massive capacity. It's still like close to 80,000 people, but it feels like a 40,000 stadium just with the design and the arch. And I think sometimes the Aviva, it's very exposed to the wind, and it's just a bit like,
you have the small stand as well.
Yeah, it's a nice arena, but it's just like people just end up sort of that hum of conversation. But I think, yeah, there's no doubt that like the people watching side of things is a big part of the match day for some people. But again, if you have success, you get the corporate crowd. So, you know, sometimes you look at the football matches, the boxes are empty. That row with the boxes is empty. Often there'll be more spaces in the premium than anywhere else. And yeah, maybe that can shape the atmosphere.
And I think I've heard you mention before that Caoimhin Kelleher has been like maybe a little bit surprised or perplexed with certain elements of the Irish football scene. I think explaining to him the atmosphere conversations we're having, I'd say you'll find that kind of curious as well.
Well, he was like in Finland, he was just looking at the crowd going, oh wow, like this is mad. But his previous jobs have been in Iceland, where it's very like, it's like a family, like it's not a place that attracts massive crowds just purely because of the population. He's been in Jamaica, he's been in Qatar working in the club game, which is soulless, definitely. So, he's never actually really...
So this is a step up.
Yeah, well, in terms of intensity of interest and of a real hardcore away support, say, travelling to games, the Iceland have the thunderclap. But aside from that, it's not necessarily like a heaving football environment. But yeah, I mean, it rages on. I think like what I will say with the football team in recent years, even though they're at a very low ebb, like the crowd numbers are still pretty good. Like the numbers of people going to the games are good, but it is quite a young crowd. It is definitely, you can feel that it's a young crowd. I think after COVID and the Kenny era and stuff, it's definitely, sometimes on the away trips, it's a lot of older fans that are still going in their, Italian 90 gear and their jerseys and so on. But it's quite a young crowd, I feel, in the stadium. And maybe it's a little bit different in rugby. The demographic of people that are going it can be different, but I think definitely the football internationals can often be a lot of young people there, and that is a natural, that sound of an atmosphere where it's a very young crowd. Yeah. It's a little bit different to a really intense game.
Well, I mentioned at the top of the show, 779 days for a competitive win at home against a team other than Gibraltar. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of season ticket holders who've been going for years, and it's September 22 was that Armenia game where they won, and that's a long time to be waiting to beat kind of another team, as I said, other than Gibraltar. You mentioned the atmosphere at the FAI Cup final. I hope Ruaidhri Higgins enjoyed it. It ended up being his final game in charge. Obviously, losing that game against the head to Drogheda was probably the final straw. But for people who maybe have been following the League of Ireland chase with Damien Duff, but maybe haven't been plugged in all season, like how would you contextualise what happened with Derry? Because it was a pretty stark decline over the very end of the season.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say about the cup final, like the strange thing was, like within 10 minutes of the game being over, like the Derry City section was deserted. They were gone. And that sort of sums up the mood. Like 2 years ago, they won the cup. They thrashed Damien Duff, Shelbourne in the final. And there was a great buzz. It was like, Derry are here. This is a club going places. They are going to challenge Shamrock Rovers. And they're going to threaten almost the Dublin domination of the league. And it's been quite flat since then. They had some good moments in 2023, but in Europe in particular. But this year, it's just been underwhelming. Like the reason Shelbourne's story is a brilliant one is because they were 25-1. It's because they don't have one of the top three budgets in the league. The two biggest budgets are Shamrock Rovers and Derry. You would think if Shamrock Rovers were going to have the year they had, losing 9 times, the natural, like if we'd had a conversation last winter and you'd said to me, Shamrock Rovers are going to lose 9 games this year, who's going to win the league? You'd be like,
Derry, definitely, yeah.
Derry will win it. They should win it comfortably. And I think, yeah, while other teams, can blame certain factors, I think Derry, they've just underperformed consistently across the year. And I think there's an element of burnout there, maybe with some players, some injury-prone players. And I think Ruaidhri Higgins, even himself, he hasn't, I think it's important to stress, he hasn't been sacked here. Sometimes mutual consent is a phrase that we all use with a little bit of a nod and a wink. And it's like, oh yeah, mutual consent. Yeah, we all know. This genuinely has mutual consent. I think he had the option to stay. I think the owner would have been keen for him to stay, but I think actually all parties have sat back. They had big discussions on Wednesday and realised, I think the best thing forward from here is just to reboot. But
it's interesting because in the post-match interview on RTE after the game, he said that there was a quote as well that he wanted to stay on and fight on.
Yeah, he said his intention was to stay. I thought the language even on that was a bit... Yeah, it was open for interpretation in hindsight, but even at the time, some people were like, not sure.
So what does that mean for Derry? Obviously, there's been big investment there. Have they missed their window to win a league? Is there a danger if you're a Derry City fan today that I suppose the kind of that era is over, or is it a case of plugging in a new manager, going again, and they'll still be the top 1 or 2 or 3 teams next year?
Yeah, it's a slight fear. I mean, I think maybe sometimes it's hard. I know they talk about it in Derry, like the Dublin media, and we can be a little bit removed from how important the team is to a lot of people there, and the fact that they haven't won the league in 27 years. So you're talking about, for one of the, certainly 3 or 4 biggest clubs in the country to have not won a league in that time, when, as we know, there's a boom and bust cycle in the League of Ireland, or there was particularly in the 2000s, where it's almost, it's gone around the merry-go-round. And think of all the different teams that have won the league since then, and Derry City haven't done it. And I sort of agree with you. There is a fear that they've missed their window. They'll never have a better chance to win the league than this year. They now have multiple players out of contract, and it does look to me like a job where, even though they have a billionaire owner and they have a good budget, that I find it hard to say you should expect them to challenge next year. I don't think it's fair in a new manager to expect that. And I think just generally, there's obviously a great buzz around the league this year, and it's been great fun, and coverage, figures, everything are improving. But there is obviously a slight concern that 3 of the top 4 this year were Dublin clubs. Derry City were the one club that was threatening that, challenging that. And if they have a bit of a drop-off next year, you end up with a very Dublin-dominated top of the table. And I don't think that's healthy. As much as it's great that there's big personalities and characters involved, and Damien Duff and Stephen Kenny and so on, you want it to be a truly national league. And I think a strong Derry is one of these things that you actually do need.
And one way to kind of keep them prominent, and you and Gary were joking before we went on air, is hiring a Damien Duff-esque figure. Is there any possibility of someone of that? Obviously no one's of Damien Duff's stature, but someone in the stratosphere of maybe taking that job on? Yeah,
it's a tough one. I don't know if they'd be a natural fit for Derry. Derry, there is a sense of, for the outside manager, Stephen Kenny was up there and really bought into it. And yeah, it's funny. If it was 6 to 8 months ago, I'd say some people at Derry would be sad that Stephen Kenny has got back into the league, because he would have been perfect. But I think, as a general point, there's no doubt that there's going to be a lot of ex-international players struggling to get on the ladder in management across the water, where there's only at times maybe 1-2 Irish men working, that they will look at Damien Duff's profile now. People are saying Damien Duff could manage Ireland off the strength of one job here. So
it would be brilliant if you had a couple of guys like that in the league.
It would be, yeah. I know Richard Dunn was in for the Bows job last year. I'm just not sure if Derry is the right fit, but I've no doubt that some of those players who want to go into management now, like the likes of Glenn Whelan or people like that, would, I think, be open to looking this direction. I know Glenn Whelan isn't a Damien Duff, and it's hard to match him in terms of his charisma and presence, but I think ex-internationals generally looking to get into the management ladder will definitely look at Ireland as an option now. I'm just not entirely sure that Derry is the right fit. Maybe a couple of years' time, I've no doubt James McLean will end up back at Derry City.
That's the first thing I thought of, but obviously
I think that would be too soon. I think it would be
player manager maybe. If Wrexham doesn't go well.
Yeah, so the thing is, Wrexham is going pretty good, and I think he's on a good thing there. It is quite literally a Hollywood story. Yeah. So
I'm expecting him to be a key character in the next season.
I think he'll be staying put for now. I think so.
It'll be certainly interesting to watch. I'd like to thank Dan and Gary for joining me on today's episode of the Indo Sport Podcast. Joe, we'll be back in the hot seat next Monday reacting to Ireland's game against England. So in the meantime, enjoy your weekend, and we'll chat to you next week.